Okay, so before we get started today, Go may still show up to give us or give you guys a little announcement about the lecture series. But in the meantime, I wanted to kind of go over a few things before we get into actual lecture today. Some of you already emailed me about this. Some of you noticed it. Some of you haven't noticed it. Anyway, the higher ups have given me the directive that I need to conduct all of the course submissions. So when you turn work in, it all has to be through Canvas. So some of you tried to log into the website and realized you couldn't post anymore. That was on purpose from my end. Everything from now on is going to be turned in the Canvas system like you're used to for your other classes. Apparently 14 years of doing it my way finally came to an end. So we're doing it the way that they want it. So you're going to make all your posts through there. That brings up the question, what are we doing about the comments? And so right now, we're just going to pause on the comments. So there aren't any comments required. And when we get to the first assignment, I'm going to work on using the peer review process through Canvas. So I think that we'll be able to set it up and we'll go from there. But you're going to have less comments this semester than previous semesters have had, because I'm going to excuse you from doing the comments based on exercises. So you're only going to be doing it on the assignments. And that's kind of a reward for bearing with me while we get switched over into the other system. That being said, I will still post the lectures like I've been doing on YouTube. So you'll get the YouTube lectures without a problem. And then I still have all the tutorials and everything on the website, and I'm not moving those over to Canvas. So when, like today, when we're working in Photoshop and you need to view one of the tutorials, it'll be a link that'll take you to the course website, my website, that has the tutorial written out and what have you. So you still have the account. You still should have the account. The difference is that your account just lets you see every piece of content on the website, but it doesn't let you post anymore. So I know that's a little bit of a change, but that's kind of the way that it has to be. So we're going to make that change. If you have questions or trouble, please let me know. Those of you that have already posted for exercise 101, 102, 103, on the course on my website, I've already transferred your grades over into Canvas system. You do not have to repost. So you've already been checked off for those things going forward. So no need to repost. I've got you checked off. But going forward, it's always going to be on Canvas. So we're going to start today with lecture. So I'm going to share my screen. Hold on one second. We got to move things around here. There we go. I still like to see faces when I'm working here. Okay, perfect. So we're going to start today. Let me go back one slide. There we go. With processing photographs and developing a digital workflow. And this is really about how do we make our images better. So last class, we talked about cameras and we talked about going out and actually taking photographs, getting your composition right, etc. Now we're going to talk about what do you do once you've taken the photos? How do you process them to make them better than they already are? Hopefully they're great to begin with, but every photo needs a little bit of touch up. And so that's what we're going to focus on today. So the first thing is, what is a workflow? And a workflow is really referring to a set of steps that's necessary for you to go through after you take a picture. And it could be as simple as I took the picture and I posted on Instagram. But it might be something more complex. And maybe I take the picture and then I do some work on it in Photoshop, and then I use it for some intended purpose. Certainly, let's say that you're a wedding photographer, you're going to have a different workflow than somebody who's just posting a selfie. And so that's acceptable and something you should acknowledge. But at the same time, in this class, we're going to really try to talk about how do we make these images better. And so the key components of a workflow are always going out and capturing the images first. You got to have images to start from. So we start with those images. Then the next step is going to get those images onto your computer. And usually it means you're getting it into one of your native applications. Maybe it's Photos on the Mac. Maybe you're using Lightroom. Maybe you're using Google Photos, one of those things. And once you have it in one of those applications, you're going to do a little bit of post-processing. And this could be something that's relatively simple. It could be just a little bit of cropping. It could be putting a filter on it. Could be rotating. Maybe you're making something black and white. And then you're going to output those photos wherever you want them to go, whether that's Instagram or what have you. So it's really, this workflow is something that you'll get used to processing and used to working with. You probably already have one, and you probably already have some software that you plan to use. I think it's important to think about how you back up your images here in terms of how you're storing your images. And the truth is this has gotten way easier than it used to be. You also typically have a certain amount of post-processing that you need to do. I know for me, when I take photos, a levels adjustment is usually a good idea. So most of my photos can be better with a simple levels adjustment. So I try to focus in on what is it that I can do and how can I tweak those settings just a little bit. And then ultimately, how are your photos going to be used? So when we get to software, are we using a Windows machine or are we using a Mac? Is it a personal computer? Are you trying to use the lab computer, etc.? But also, this is a key component. Can you do editing that's non-destructive? And what I mean by non-destructive editing is what the changes you make to the photo, are they permanent or are they in a form where they're like a layer and you could turn them off if you didn't like them? So we want to avoid destructive editing where the changes become permanent and keep with the non-destructive editing strategy where we can always go back and change and modify, etc. This line item here, is it free or is it a professional grade photo piece of software? It's really become, most of the free software can handle the professional level. Professional level also involves generally some Photoshop work. The only professional level software that's out there anymore is a program called Lightroom that's built by Adobe. I'll talk about that in a little bit. First, we'll go through some free options for processing. Google Photos has their own set of free options. They have a bunch of presets. So if you load, certainly if you work in Android, but if you load your photos into Google Photos, you can do some basic editing with them. Obviously, you have to have a connection to the internet in order to do that. And I have a note here that's a semi-destructive editor. Your changes are temporary until you decide to finalize, and then they become permanent. So you can't go back after. Photoshop Express, this is the Photoshop that's available for your iPad, so to speak. And it can do a lot of what Photoshop can do, but it's not quite as advanced. So it's nice. You can do a few of the editing features. Again, you have to have a connection to the internet, and it is a fairly destructive editor. Once you make those changes, they're permanent. Pixlr is actually a great piece of software, and it's an undersung hero of what Photoshop does. It can do most of the stuff that Photoshop can do. It even has things like clone stamp in it. So you can really get away with a lot of, this is once the class is over and you don't want to pay for your Adobe subscription, you can actually do quite a bit with this Pixlr program. So it's almost Photoshop, which is awesome. It does require an internet connection, but it does give you pretty advanced editing features. It does not give you adjustment layers though. And that's kind of the big ticket item that Photoshop gives us that these other programs don't. Photos is, if you're in the Mac ecosystem and you're working with photos, you can do almost everything that you can do in Photoshop in Photos, except for the collage part. So all the post-processing, the levels adjustments, those can all be done in Photos for Mac, which is really nice. And obviously that would be possible on an iPad or an iPhone as well. But you're stuck in the Mac ecosystem. You have to be there in order to do it. But you've got a lot of the features that Photoshop would have, including the levels, histograms, the curves, dodge and burn, and a lot of things that we'll talk about today. Then we get into the professional options. I mentioned before about Lightroom. We'll get to that in just a second. Luminar is another, quote, professional program. It has a fee associated with it, so you have to buy it. But it's pretty good at doing professional level adjustments by basically clicking a button. So it's can be a standalone app, or you can plug it into Photoshop. So you can be working in Photoshop, throw it into Luminar, and then have it brought back in. Next one is Lightroom. This is what I mentioned before. It's kind of the gold standard of photo management in terms of how you store and organize your files. It's the professional level. So, the wedding photographers are going to be using Lightroom. It's part of the Adobe ecosystem. So if you're working in Photoshop, InDesign, Illustrator, Lightroom is a natural extension of those programs. Obviously, it's expensive because you have to have the subscription to it, the ongoing subscription, and it has incredibly advanced editing features, extensive metadata support, lots of organizational strategies, lots of backup strategies. So that's all built in and baked into Lightroom. And then we come down to actual Adobe Photoshop. And I saved this one for last because this is what we're going to focus on in this class. Obviously, it's expensive because you have to have a subscription to it. Good for you. You have your DVC subscription this semester. It's non-destructive because we can use layers and then save our Photoshop file and be able to turn on and off layers in any order. So no changes become permanent, which is great. It has really the most advanced editing features of any piece of software relating to photos. So we can go in and make pixel by pixel corrections on a particular image. So it's very sophisticated in terms of the things that we can do with it. It's really, that's why we end up using it for collage work, because we can do so much with it. There is no organization built into Photoshop. It's really a one-off. You want to work on a photo, you take that photo, you open that photo, and you work on it specifically. So it's not, there's no albums or organizational strategy behind it. It's really just about editing that one single picture. So when we get to organizing images, you guys probably do this inherently anyway. There is something called metadata that's included with every photo that you take. And so you can see this information if you dig deep enough. But essentially, when your camera takes an image, it ends up capturing all kinds of information. So right here, this is an older example. It's not one that was shot with my iPhone, but it's telling me what camera I used. It's telling me what lens I used. It's also telling me the ISO. Remember, we talked about ISO last class. So it's telling me what ISO I used. It's telling me what exposure value I was set at, what my aperture was, what my shutter speed was. So all that information is nice, not necessarily critical, but it's also telling me a bunch of other things like the date and time that I took the photo. That's pretty good. It's telling me the size, etc. Now, when we shoot with our phones, we have GPS chips in our phones. So it's also going to tell me exactly where I took that image. So it's going to tell me the precise location. So you couple all that together, and that's inside the photo file. So when it's in that file, you don't have to see it, but it's extra data stored with the file, and you can go back and check on it later. So we can, in any one of these organizational software programs, you can organize by albums. You can organize, by a variety of strategies. Some are more sophisticated than others. Albums are as simple as you drag these photos into a certain album. If you're in Photos on the Mac, you can create shared albums and share them with other people. They can upload to the same albums, etc. Events, this was actually a pretty innovative idea when it came out. Now it's just kind of obvious. And the idea here is that you tend to take photos during a certain group of time. So you might go to a birthday party and take a bunch of photos. Well, the computers are smart enough to know that all the photos that you took in that group kind of belong together. And this is how they come up with those little mini slideshows or whatever, summarizing your summer or whatever. It's kind of understands a certain group of photos and then works from those groups. It's kind of an intuitive thing on the computer's part. Facial recognition is everywhere. It's something that somehow we all kind of ignore the fact that it exists, but it's really so well developed now that a computer can look through a group of photos and pick out the same person over and over again. So you can actually now start to search by who's in a particular photo and look for that particular person. Places is obvious. I touched on this a little bit earlier. This is the GPS location of where you actually took the photo. Oops, can't hit my button. Okay, so this is really the bread and butter right now that we need to get to today. And that are, what are the typical adjustments that we're going to be doing to photos? And I should add that part of my lecture today, the slides are a little bit shorter because we're going to do a live demo with Photoshop. And I'm going to walk you through the stuff that you're doing in exercise 104. So the typical adjustments that we're doing here, first one would be a crop or a resize of the image. You take the image in one capacity and then you realize that, you know what, I really want to change the overall composition of the image. I'm going to go in, I'm going to crop it, I'm going to change it so that it looks better, right? So you end up with an image that looks a little bit better. Another example here, we're cropping in Photoshop. Notice that when you perform a crop in Photoshop, it is automatically giving you that grid that is the rule of thirds. And so in this crop right there, we're using the rule of thirds, we're seeing that grid, and she's right at that 1/3 line. and she's also walking in the direction of the larger space. So the 2/3 this direction, right, is the part that she's walking toward. So this is the larger space, and there's the person. So the composition ends up being a very strong composition. The rule of thirds doesn't have to just apply to a rectangular image. So here we are at another rule of thirds crop, where the original image actually was pretty centered. And then when you recrop it, they're cropping it square, but they're putting the eye line of the dog and the kid right on that rule of thirds. And where they're hugging is right on that rule of thirds. And we end up with a nice, strong composition as a result. I would love to work here. I'm sure this was a staged photo, but this looks fantastic to me. Again, strong rule of thirds in the composition. Exposure. So this is the other thing. When you're shooting photos, it's very likely that you ended up kind of messing up the exposure. It happens. So we might need to lighten up a dark image to show some more detail. We might need to darken a lighter image if it ended up being a little bit too light or too blown out. If you're using a RAW format, you can get away with this. If you're using just the JPEG, it's much harder to actually bring detail back. So here's an example. The image on the left was just too dark when it was originally shot. Then you look at the image on the right, and that's exposed correctly for that particular photo. Brightness and contrast, these are big adjustments. So I tend to stay away from brightness and contrast because it's just too broad of an adjustment for most photos. But it's essentially, if you're adjusting the overall brightness of the image, you're making the image brighter as a whole. I think a levels adjustment is much better because it's brightening the bright areas. We'll see that when I do it live. Contrast is having stronger contrast between the darks and lights of the image. So again, those are broad strokes, and they're kind of a basic tool relative to using levels or curves, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. Those are the more sophisticated tools that get us the same results. And you can see here in this example where we're adjusting the contrast, that it's the image on the left is pretty awful. The image on the right is decent. So they're kind of big scale adjustments. Color saturation or vibrance. Maybe you're correcting for an improper white balance. We talked about that before, but it's essentially the ability to tint an image a certain direction in color. You can make an image a little bit more yellow or a little bit more orange or a little bit more blue. And that's something that may be beneficial depending on what it is that you're trying to do or create. Saturation and vibrance are something that are actually very important. And I think the best way of describing these or showing these is that saturation is the overall amount of color that's in the image. So we can give the image more color. We can make the greens more vibrant, the blues more vibrant, etc. But when we do that using the saturation tool, all the colors are being affected. And that includes skin tones. So oranges and reds, those are all going to get darker. On the right here, we have vibrance. Vibrance is bringing out the colors that aren't skin tones. So the blues and the greens are going to get much more saturated, much more color there, but we're not going to affect the skin tone, which is a really nice thing because we don't want everybody to end up like the Oompa Loompas in Willy Wonka's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, right? So vibrance can really help us get away with that. Sepia tone and black and white are also something that is frequently used. You may convert images to black and white. Generally, we don't shoot in black and white anymore. You shoot in color, and then you convert to black and white. And there's a specific strategy about how you convert an image to black and white, or you convert an image into the sepia tone. Sepia is just a brown and white rather than a black and white. Focus. So we can sharpen an image to make the edges stand out. We could slightly blur an image to soften the focus of a particular image. But you can't correct a blurry image after it's taken. So if you were taking a photo and you accidentally nudged the camera and it ended up blurry, you can't go back and make it unblurry. So just because we can use sharpen or focus, depending on what it's called in a various software application, doesn't mean we can correct something that's majorly wrong. So we can see here on the left and the right, the image on the right has been sharpened a bit, and there's just a little bit more detail between the pages. We can see just a little bit more of those pages, a little bit more contrast. So they're very close, but the one on the right has just a little bit more detail. That's what we can do with the sharpen tool. So red eye reduction is also something that happens This is directly related to the position of the flash and the camera lens. So of course, in post-production, we can go in and we can eliminate the red eye. That's not a problem. But this happens because when you're in a dark room, this is typically where you would use a flash in photography anyway. When you're in a dark room, the pupils of your eyes dilate and they get really big. And then somebody comes up and they take a picture of you. And when they do that, the flash that's near their camera goes into your eye and bounces off the back of your eye and comes back out as that little red eye. So if we move the flash away from the camera, so the flash is over to the side and it flashes, you're not going to get red eye because it's not going directly into the eye and coming back toward the camera lens. The closer the flash and the lens are, the more likely that is to happen. This is also why they have those pre-flashes, the red eye reduction on your camera, where it'll flash first. And what that's doing is it's closing down and constricting your pupil before they take the actual picture. And so by constricting it, it's allowing less light to flow. The other key of this is that, or the other illustration, I guess I should say, is that when you're at a wedding, and I always use weddings because there's always a photographer running around at a wedding, so you can kind of observe that. When you're at a wedding and there's a photographer running around, they always have the flash like way off to one side as they're shooting pictures. And that's so that they don't have to go in and correct this after the fact. It also improves the lighting in the overall composition anyway. So levels, these are, if you take nothing else away from the lecture today, I want you to take away the power of levels and curves. Levels is probably the single most important thing. And what it is, it's an adjustment of the image. So there is a true black in the image and there's a true white in the image. And I think it's easiest to do when I show you an example. So if we look at these two images, the image on the left was the original image as it came out of the camera. And so look at that image. And when you look at that image, I want you to identify, is there a spot in there that is truly black, like deep, dark black? Well, not quite. The closest things maybe would be like right there, or maybe a little bit right in there. But really, those aren't black. They're kind of a dark gray. Same thing if I asked you to identify a white. You know, maybe the brightest white in this is right there. I can put a little W next to it. This would be a black, so we'll put a black and a black. So this one is probably the white, but it's really just a light gray. It's not really a white. So when we do a levels adjustment, we say, you know what? I want in the new image, this area here, that should be actually black. Oh, I didn't quite draw far enough, sorry. There it is. I want that to really be a true dark black. Likewise, down here, that should be a true dark black. And this area right here should be a true white. It shouldn't be a light gray, it should be a true white. And so that's what we're doing a levels adjustment. We're telling the image, this should be true white, this should be true black. Please adjust all the colors in between so that we end up with a good overall image. We can see these represented. Let's see, I'm going to go back 2 slides, sorry. We can see that represented by this graph. So see the gray graph here? It doesn't matter that it goes off the page. That's the distribution of color from black to white in the image. And so the overall image right now goes from here to here. So you can see that this corner of our histogram is what the lightest color on the image. And it's really far away from what true white is, this being true white over there. Likewise, this here is the darkest gray we have on the image, and that's a far direction from our true black. So when we do a levels adjustment, we're actually pulling the true black over until it meets the graphic here. Likewise, we're pulling the true white over until it meets the histogram here, and we're redistributing the colors. This is a hard one to verbally explain, but I think when we do it later today, it'll make a lot of sense. Curves, this one's almost impossible to explain without doing it actively so you can see what happens, but I'm going to do my best to explain it. I have 2 examples here. The one on the left doesn't have a curve adjustment. The one on the right does have a curve adjustment. But the key of curves is that we can make the lighter areas of the image lighter, and we can make the darker areas of the image darker, independent of each other. So we're not doing it to the whole image. We're selectively controlling just the light areas or just the dark areas of the particular image. And so, like I said, when we get to this, the best way of doing it is to actually practice it in Photoshop. So here's another example of curves. We can see the little curves palette brought up here, and you can see that it's enhancing part of the image, but not all of the image. And then we get to the final results. How are you going to export them? How are you going to, post them to the web, et cetera? You guys are all very familiar with that. I don't have to teach you that anymore. It's interesting in 14 years how much life has changed in terms of what the end product of photographs are and become. Okay, so we're going to stop there. Like I said, the lecture portion today was a little bit short because I want to spend some time in Photoshop. So let's jump out of the slides here, maybe, if it'll let me out. There we go. And I'm going to pull up Photoshop, and I'm actually going to pull it up on the remote desktop. Now, you guys should all be able to install Photoshop on your home computer. And the reason that I'm doing it on the remote desktop is because I've enabled the ability to track my keystrokes and stuff, which will help all of you see what it is that I'm doing. And it helps in the recording afterward to be able to see that stuff. So I want to do it that way. You should all be able to download and install Photoshop. And that's something I'm going to check during the check-ins today. For those students that have their check-ins today, I'm going to make sure that you have Photoshop installed because I want you to be able to do this work. Once you have Photoshop installed, though I guess I should mention, when you're installing it on your home computer, there is one screen that pops up when you use your Insight email to log in that asks whether this is a work or school account or a personal account. You guys want to choose personal in that context, because choosing personal is going to allow, that's how they do the licensing. So you want to pick personal in order to be able to actually log in and download Photoshop. So I have Photoshop open. And I want to, this is kind of the splash screen that opens up when we first open up Photoshop. I'm going to go ahead and open an image. So I ask that you guys get your images ready. Mine are in my OneDrive already. I've already synced my OneDrive. We talked about that on the first day. It's the little cloud icon down here in the bottom right. I'm not doing that live because I pre-logged in so that I'd have my computer ready to go. I'm going to click on my computer right now. I'm going to go into my OneDrive folder. Let's go into today's folder. There we go. Here's some sample images. And I'm going to work with these sample images. I'm going to go ahead and open all of these images because some of them will work better for different demonstrations than others. All right, while those are opening, I'm going to go ahead and pull back up the actual exercise that we're working on today. So this is exercise 104. That's what you're going to be working on. I'm going to have you work primarily with 3 images. So pick 3 of your favorite images from the 50 plus that you took last class. And then we're going to work through these different strategies. So we're going to convert to black and white. We're going to do a levels adjustment. We're going to do a curves adjustment. We're going to do something that I call pop, and we're going to do a little bit of dodge and burn. So there's 5 pieces of this plus the original. 3 images, that gives us 18 total images to post today. Okay, so I will work through that. I'll show you the process as we go through, but each one of these is a clickable link. So if I were to click this, here's Photoshop 1.1, black and white. There's a little video that walks you through how to do it. And there's also a step-by-step with some image examples so that you know what it is that you're clicking on, etc. So I'll come back and visit that, but I'm going to start with my first image. So here it is. But before we do that, let's go through Photoshop just so we kind of get an idea of what the workspace looks like in Photoshop. So on the left-hand side here, I have all of my basic tools laid out. So that's my standard toolbar, including my selection tools at the top. I have brush tools. I have a clone stamp tool. And we'll get down to some of this. I have a dodge and burn tool. It's this little circle with a rod sticking out of it. We'll get to that a little bit later today. So those are all available on the left side. The files that I have open are listed here, this being the one that's active. I have this ribbon at the top is a contextual ribbon that changes based on what tool I have selected. So right now I have a selection tool, so it's giving me information about selection. If I were to switch, for example, to a brush tool, it's going to give me information about the brush tool or changes that I can make about the brush tool. So it's important to know that that ribbon changes depending on what it is that I'm trying to do. At the top here, we have our normal menu structure. We'll get into that a little bit later. On the right-hand side of the screen right here, by default, I have my properties open, and that's going to give me basic information about my image. Below that, I have layers. So this is telling me about my layers. Currently, I have one layer. It's called the background layer. We'll get to adjustments in a little bit, but this is going to pop up for us, and we're going to see these various adjustments, and we're going to work in the adjustments in just a little bit. And so that gives you a basic overview of what's happening in Photoshop. And so we'll work with Photoshop actually pretty extensively for about 2 weeks. So you'll get much more comfortable with Photoshop and what it is that we're doing. So let's look at basic post-processing. The first piece that I was going to work on here is converting an image to black and white. Now, what I don't want to do is just run up here to the image menu and go to mode and then say grayscale, because that's going to strip out a bunch of the color information and really not let me precisely change this image into black and white. Instead, everything that I'm going to work on today is using what's called an adjustment layer. And an adjustment layer is about making changes to the image that aren't permanent. So the image actually is locked on the background. So I'm not going to make changes to that. I'm instead going to come up here and I'll go to the layer menu and I'll go to new and then adjustment layer. Oh, sorry, it's down here. New adjustment layer. So it's layer, new adjustment layer, and then I'm going to choose one of these options, and we're going to go through a bunch of them. I'm actually, believe it or not going to pick black and white here. Right? Instead, I'm going to come all the way down to something called channel mixer. So it's layer, new adjustment layer, channel mixer. And that brings up this new layer dialog box. I'm going to go ahead and type in here black and white. And then I'll say OK. And we'll see over here in my layers that I now have the background image, but I have a layer called black and white on top of it. Furthermore, when that's selected, my properties here are giving me the channel mixer properties, which I'm seeing. I believe on the Mac, this is a pop-up as opposed to being inline, but I think it kind of pops out to the side. But you guys will see it when you go through it. And so what I have the ability to do is I can check this box here for monochrome. And when I check that box for monochrome, you see that my image turns to black and white from being color. But the neat thing here is that there are some presets that help me get better results. And this is why we're doing it in this strategy. So under preset, you'll see that there are 6 different options. Black and white infrared, black and white with a blue filter, green filter, orange filter, red filter, and yellow filter. And so what this is doing is it's mimicking if we were actually shooting with a traditional camera and we put a lens colored filter on top of our lens and shot that way in black and white. So it's going to highlight the colors differently. So what I want you to do with black and white is I want you to scroll through and try each one of these presets and see which one looks best for your image. So we'll start with the infrared. Okay, that's not that good. That one's definitely not that good. That was a blue filter. Let's try the green filter. Okay, the green filter looks pretty good. Let's try the orange filter. Yeah, that's darkening up the sky nicely. Let's try the red filter. That's good. The overall image is a little bit dark. Let's try the yellow filter. Yeah, that one's a little bit better. I think I might like the orange filter the best. But again, this is about you deciding what looks best to you on the particular image. But you see that in the process of converting to black and white, there are a bunch of options. So depending on the image, you may pick a different filter. So let's say, for example, I jumped over to this image. Well, sorry, I'm deciding which image. Let's say I wanted to convert this image to black and white. So I do the same thing. I go up to layer, new adjustment layer, and I'm going to come down here to channel mixer. We'll call this black and white. And this is why in exercise 104, I'm asking you to do this to 3 different images, because the changes are going to be different. I'll check the box for monochrome, and then I'll go through the presets. So let's start with the infrared. Go to blue, green, orange, red. Oh, I think I like the red in this one. Let's try the yellow. No, I think the red is the right one. So we're really looking, how do we best enhance these particular images? So there's this one, and there's that one as examples. So different filters, but we're getting different results. So let's come back to this first image. The great thing about working in Photoshop is that this black and white has essentially become a layer. And so that little eye that's there, if I click on that, it just gets turned off. So I can turn it into black and white, or I can turn it off at will. And I can choose whether I want it on or off, which is, again, one of the very powerful things about Photoshop. So let's move on. That was converting an image to black and white. And you can see here, let me bring up there. We've basically followed along this box. Next one we're going to work on is a levels adjustment. So this is the Photoshop 1.2. I'll open that one up. Again, there's a video tutorial, and then there's a walkthrough. Now, this is going to change based on the image. This histogram is going to change, and that's part of why I'm going to show it to you in several different images. So let me jump back to the school computer. Here we go. And I'm going to add an adjustment layer again. So I'll go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and this time I'm going to choose Levels. And so we can leave it named Levels, and I'll say OK. And there it is. And if we look at the histogram in this image, there's actually not a lot I can change. I have a true white that's in the cloud, and I have a true black that's kind of in this branch over here. So there's really not much I can change on this image. Let's look at a different image. Come over to this image. Let's do this image. I can tell right now that there is a true white, but there's definitely not a true black. So let me go into my layer, New Adjustment Layer, and let me go to Levels. And there we are. There's the histogram. See how that's different than the histogram of the image that I was just looking at? There is a true white. I told you there would be, so this hasn't changed. But the black, there isn't a true black. So I can see the distribution of color, and I want to move this slider right over to where that graph really starts to go up. And so you can see when I've done that, that my image has gone from kind of muted colors to really having some strong dark blacks in it. So let's practice on another one of the images. I don't know whether this one will have it. Let's look at this one. So let me go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Levels. Okay. And this one could use a little bit of both. So we'll pull this slider over to there, and we'll pull this slider back to there. And so you can see the before. There's the before, and then you can see the after. And in this context, I think you can really see how it's changed and enhanced the image. So depending on your image, the levels adjustment is going to do more or less on the overall change. Here's one that we'll do as well. This one has a pretty strong black, but no white. So let's do that. Let's go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and we'll go to Levels. Say OK. Like I said, it has a good black, but no white. So we pull this over to enhance the white. And so you can see, actually, that one doesn't change that much. It just brightens up the image a little bit. So that's why I'm having you do it to multiple images. And that's why I'm doing it for multiple images, so that you can really see these changes as they're happening. OK, so let's move on to the next. I'll come back to my first one here. I can pull up my browser. So we just did 1.1. We just did 1.2. We're going to move on to 1.3. And this is the curves adjustment. This is probably the most difficult one to see and to understand. So it's really going to take practice. So here's the curves adjustment like that. And we'll go ahead and go through it. Bring back up Photoshop here. OK, so let's go through curves adjustment. You're getting the idea. We're always going to Layer, New Adjustment Layer. This time we're choosing curves. And so we're seeing the histogram like we did before. So this dialog box is a little bit different. Everything below this diagonal line is causing the image to get darker. Everything above this line is causing the image to get lighter. So, for example, if I were to click right here in the middle and drag the curve, I can make the overall image darker, or I can make the overall image lighter. Neither of those is really turning out particularly well. I should note that if you go too far, you're going to get really kind of wonky results. Same thing with the dark. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave a point right there in the center. So I left that point in the center. Now I'm going to start to control the lighter portion of the image. So in this upper part of the curve, I'm going to click and create a new point. And now I'm controlling only the upper, only the lights. So if you look at the sky, you can see this start to happen, right? Where I'm making the sky lighter or I'm making the sky darker. So in this context, let's make it just a little bit lighter. I'll come down here and I'll make this just a little bit darker. And you can see that it's adjusting only the dark area. See how the sky is not changing right now? It's only that dark area of the picture that's changing. So I can make that just a little bit darker. And this faint S in the curve is what's called an S curve. And generally your adjustments are going to end up a little bit like that. And if we were to look at it, turning it on and turning it off, you can see that there's a subtle difference, primarily in the dark area of the image. So let's look at it on a different image. Let's come here. Let's go into my layer, new adjustment layer, and we'll do curves. Say OK. We'll set a point right in the center. So I'm going to click right in the center of that graph, and then I'm going to work on the upper and lower side. So let's work on what's happening there. So if I raise that up, it's kind of enhancing the color just a little bit. Let's lower this one down just a little bit. I'm going to darken that up just a whisker. And so now we can see there was the original image, and there's the post process. So it looks just a little bit better. And so that's one of the great things about turning layers on and off, is that you can see this happen somewhat live. Let's look at this one. I'm going to do it layers, new adjustment layer, and we'll go to curves. Same thing, I'll click and put a point in the middle, and then I'll adjust the top and the bottom. So let me adjust that just a little bit. And I'll adjust that just a little bit. And now you can see that with the curves. Now, these can all stack. So if I've done the adjustment, here I am with the curves adjustment, I can still turn on the black and white and have these stack up with the black and white. So there was my original black and white. There's my black and white with the levels adjustment on it. And there's my black and white with the curves adjustment on it. So I can still use it as part of the overall image. I'm turning them off so you can see them as individual steps, but it doesn't mean that you can't stack them together. And I think that's it. That's an important piece of this puzzle. Okay, so we've done curves now. The next one is going to be something that I call pop. And this one works best when we're working with an image that has lots of kind of oranges and stuff in it. So here's a perfect opportunity on the sunset scene. We're going to do what's called pop. And so this one, we're going to open up that channel mixer again. So I'm going to go to layer, new adjustment layer. And we're going to go to channel mixer. And I'm going to rename this to be pop. I'll go ahead and say OK. This is Photoshop 1.4. So what we're going to do is we're going to increase the value right here of the output channel. So right now in my channel mixer, I have the output channel as red. I'm going to increase the red value to 116. Okay, now it gets a little weird when I first do it, but in order to get my numbers to still add up to 100%, I'm actually going to decrease the green and blue channels. So I'm going to do -8 and another -8. And my overall percentage is now back to 100. Then I'm going to change my output channel from red to green and do the same thing, but boost the green value. So we're going to go to 116. And then we'll go in the red, it'll be -8. And in the blue, it'll be -8. And then we'll switch the output channel to blue and do the same thing. So blue goes up to 116. Green goes to -8. And red goes to -8 as well. So once I've done those, we hopefully will be able to see a slight difference. So there it is without, and there it is with. I'm boosting the colors a little bit more blue, a little bit more orange. It's most obvious in like a sunset scenario. So I want you to experiment with this. Hopefully you can pick an image that has a lot of color in it. The image that I have right here is also a candidate for this. It's got a lot of red in it. So let's go up and do it one more time. I'll go up to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and I'm going to choose Channel Mixer. Let me rename that to be Pop. And I'm going to work through those channels. We'll start at channel red, and we'll go up to 116, and we'll do -8, and we'll do -8. Oops. Now I should point out that these are values that I think give us pretty good results. You could change your values. It could be, 120, -10 and -10. I just think 116 is about the happy place. It seems about right. But you're more than welcome to experiment with other numbers as well. So I've done it for the green channel now. The last one is going to be the blue channel. So we'll say -8. -8 there, and 116. All right, and so now if I were to turn on and off the pop, you can see that the colors have been brought out just a little bit more. So I encourage you to experiment with that. That was Photoshop 1.4. Bring those back up again. That was Photoshop 1.4. And the last one is going to be Photoshop 1.5, which is the dodge and burn. So this one's actually a little bit different than the other ones that we've done. And I'm throwing it to you just to keep you on your toes, just a little bit different. So we're going to use this and create this a little bit differently. It's going to involve a few more tools. So let's bring back up our Photoshop here. And let's do it on this image. So that I can just see the full color image. And this time, when we go up to layer, we're not going to choose a new adjustment layer. We're actually going to choose a new regular layer. So I'm going to go to Layer, New Layer. And right here in the New Layer dialog box, I'm going to say this is Dodge and Burn. And this is important. Under Mode, we're going to change from Normal to Multiply, which I'm not seeing. Where is it? No, wait, I'm wrong. It's Overlay. Hold on. I want to make sure that I don't tell you the wrong thing. It's Overlay. Let's bring that up. Dodge and Burn. Yep, it's Overlay. See? Even I make mistakes, right? So let's get back over there. It's Overlay. And then there's a checkbox that shows up. We're going to fill with Overlay Neutral Color 50% gray. So Dodge and Burn, Mode, Overlay, fill with Overlay Neutral Color. We'll go ahead and say OK. So the advantage here is we could dodge and burn directly on our image, but that permanently messes or can disrupt our original image. When we have this, this is then going to dodge and burn on a layer that can be turned on and turned off. So let me come over here to the dodge and burn tool. I'm looking for a circle with a little line coming out of it. That's the dodge tool. What the dodge tool does is it lightens your image. The burn tool darkens your image. Let's start with the burn tool. I click on the burn tool. Now you see the circle that's shown up on my work here. That is then the circle that I'm going to be painting this darkening with. So if I were to say, let's say, darken that brush, you can see that as I move my mouse over it, I can darken that particular piece. Now, obviously, I'm exaggerating what I'm doing here. Right? So let's back up. So I'm going to go back into history so that I can get back to there. And now what I want to do is I want to have the brush be a little bit bigger. So I'll come up to my contextual ribbon here and I'll choose a larger size. So my size right now is 65. Let's bump it up to, I don't know, maybe 150 or so. And you can see that my circle just got bigger. Now that my brush is a little bit bigger, I'm just going to selectively darken up a little bit of the clouds here, maybe darken up a little bit down here, maybe a little bit over here, maybe a little bit more in those clouds, a little bit more there. I'm just kind of selectively going through and adjusting. Okay, then I can switch over into the dodge tool. And again, I have to make the brush a little bit bigger. And this is going to selectively lighten parts of the image. So I could lighten up this piece of cloud, for example. And this takes a little bit of practice. I could lighten up, I don't know, this mountain here. So what I'm doing is I'm selectively choosing what parts of the image are light versus what parts of the image are dark. And we can see that showing up right here on the dodge and burn layer. The advantage, again, is that I can turn this on and turn this off, and you can see the changes that I've made to the image. Now, I'm not saying this looks the best, but I want to introduce you to the concept. So after you've done all of these various steps, what you're going to do is you're going to start saving your work. So pick the one that has everything on it. So I've jumped around a lot because I've been demonstrating, but I want to show you the process. So let's say that I'm going to save this one. I'm going to turn everything off except for the background layer. I'm going to go up to File, and then I'm going to go to Export, and I'm going to choose Export As. Now, it's possible in the various documentation that you have, I might have something that says File, Export, Save for Web. That's old. They've eliminated that in Photoshop now, so it doesn't exist. So we're going to use the Export As. Please tell me if you find one of those, because I think I've gotten rid of all of them, but I might not have. So this Export As, we're going to change the format here to JPEG. And we want under image size, I don't need massive images uploaded to Canvas. So the image size, we want whatever the larger number is to be about 1,000. So this one's about 1,000. I don't need to change it. And we'll go ahead and click on Export. Now it's going to ask me to save it. So let's bump back here. Let's do a new folder for the spring of 2022. And so this is original. So we could say this is exercise 101, image 1, original. Click Save. Then I'll turn on the black and white layer. I'll go up to File and then Export, Export As. All the settings should be the same now because I've done it once. And this time, this is going to be the black and white. And I'll click Save. Then I'll turn on, in this case, the dodge and burn. And I'll go to, I could turn back off the black and white if I wanted to keep it colored there. And I could go to File and then Export, Export As. All the settings there are good. I'll export. And this now is going to be the dodge and burn. And I'll click Save. So you do that for each one of them. So each image, you should have a total of 6 because you're going to go through and do each step. So it would be original image plus the 5 edits. Once you have all 18 of those images, you're going to go over into your Canvas site and you're going to actually turn those in. I'm going to ask that you turn them in using the text editor. So don't upload them as attachment. Just go ahead and put them directly in your post. And if you struggle with that, that's what our check-ins today. We can go through those individually and I can help you with it. Okay, so that's the roadmap of what we're doing. I want you to do these post processes in Photoshop. So at some point, you're going to need to install Photoshop, and then you're going to go through and do each of these post processes, and you're going to turn in those 18 images as your exercise 104. Okay, do I have any questions?
Yeah, I've got a couple questions.
Sure, go ahead.
So about the whole website thing and Canvas, if
Yes.
we haven't submitted the first two assignments yet, can we still submit it on the website, or do you want us to do that through Canvas?
Go ahead and do it through Canvas.
Okay,
So
thank
if you,
you.
if you haven't turned things, if you have turned them in, I've checked you off. You don't need to return them in. But if you haven't checked them in, just go ahead and turn them in directly on Canvas.